Welcome to GRE. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Sure, you might find monetary inflation annoying. Today, learn why inflation is even worse than you think. It is an immoral force. How bad homebuyer affordability has become by metro region. Then, why conventional finance and IRAs don't move the meter in your life, and more today on Get Rich Education. When you want the best real estate and finance info, the modern internet experience limits your free articles access, and it's replete with paywalls, and you've got pop-ups and push notifications and cookies disclaimers. Ugh. At no other time in history has it been more vital to place nice, clean, free content into your hands that actually adds no hype value to your life. See, this is the golden age of quality newsletters, and I write every word of ours myself. It's got a dash of humor, and it's to the point. To get the letter, it couldn't be more simple. Text GRE to 66866, and when you start the free newsletter, you'll also get my 1-hour fast real estate course completely free. It's called the Don't Quit Your Daydream Letter, and it wires your mind for wealth. Make sure you read it. Text GRE to 66866. Text GRE to 66866.
You're listening to the show that has created more financial freedom than nearly any show in the world. This is Get Rich Education.
Welcome to GRE. From Gainesville, Florida to Brownsville, Texas, and across 188 nations worldwide, I'm Keith Weinhold, and you're listening to Get Rich Education. I'm honored to have you here. Inflation is immoral. Now, at best, you might find what the central bank, the Fed, does as annoying on the consumer level. It might even severely debase your standard of living, eroding away your one and only quality of life. But how does inflation have an immoral impact on you and the actors in an economy? A honeymaker sells his jars of honey for $20. The Fed prints money like crazy. The money supply doubles. Well, the honeymaker now has three options. Keep selling honey for $20, which is where he eats the loss and keeps providing honey for his customers at the same price. Secondly, he can water down the honey or use other inferior ingredients, which is known as skimpflation, or shrink the honey jar size, known as shrinkflation. The last option is to be honest and increase the honey price to $40. But if he behaves honestly, he drives away his customers and they look for honey elsewhere. So therefore, those that choose to water down the honey will outcompete the honest guy. And over time, what happens with currency debasement is that producers must now weigh their financial well-being with moral integrity, and that is the problem. This is why inflation has an immoral impact on human beings. It's also a contributor to why food quality suffered during the big wave of inflation in the 1970s and 1980s. It led to rampant obesity and prescription drugs now comprising half of our TV commercials. All these people now walking around as near zombies that need their meds, and on top of that, somehow society has quickly come to believe that this is normalcy. Then the 2020s wave of inflation is both fueling that trend, and it's now making homes unaffordable for the middle class. As a landlord, the honest thing to do then is to raise the rent. It's not honey inflation or rent inflation, because the honeymaker and the landlord didn't create it. It is central bank inflation. Higher rent is simply the consequence of more dollars in circulation. And simultaneously, new build homes, they are indeed experiencing shrinkflation as a result of this currency inflation. I discussed the incredible shrinking size of new build single-family homes with you last week, where that new home size has fallen 14% in the past decade, plus or minus. Well, the average American apartment size, that's falling too. Yes, apartment developers, in their new projects, they're cutting square footage, and they're doing that to try to contain rents. The square footage of apartment units being built has not been this small since at least last century and maybe ever. Soaring construction costs, that means developers, they've got to either pass along all of those increases through into the rents or find ways to limit rent. Well, one way to do that is by building smaller units. Yes, apartment construction shrinkflation. And who can blame the builder? Because rental affordability has been of increased importance in recent years, and developers have got to be able to convince their investors and their lenders that there is going to be sufficient demand at pro forma rent levels. Among apartment units completed in 2022, that's the most recent year available, average unit sizes fell to 1,045 square feet. And that is the lowest level on record for apartments, and we just got confirmation on that through the U.S. Census Bureau figures. Yes, that is for newly built multifamily rental units, that therefore apartment sizes are down 8% from just 5 years ago, and that number could drop a bit further when 2023 stats are released. Yes, American lifestyles are being shrinkflated all over the place, and it is even worse for those that don't own assets. And a recent peak of apartment size construction was 2013, when they were just over 1,130 square feet. And I told you that the latest figure here is, again, 1,045 square feet. The COVID era really saw new build apartment sizes drop fast because that's when people started to split up, like if they weren't a family. Now, when rents rise, whether that's for apartments or single-family homes or self-storage units or whatever it is, most any kind of real estate, when those rents rise, people try to keep from raising the rent sometimes. Now, landlords, instead of raising the rent, they can instead skimpflate themselves. They can do that by delaying maintenance, transferring the electric bill to the tenant, adding a surcharge for storage locker use, firing the doorman, charging to park beneath the carport, or not replacing an old fridge. I might have given you some ideas there, but I do not advocate that that's the best way. The bottom line is that inflation is not just a persistent economic affliction, it's an immoral force. And the ethical thing to do, like you learn with a honeymaker, is raise the rent. Now, when wages don't keep up with prices, that's a problem. Let's take a look at just how bad affordability is. All right, here is the lowest salary amount that U.S. households need to at least earn to comfortably afford the typical priced U.S. home. Okay, we're rounding to the nearest $1,000 here. In 2020, that figure was just $59K. In 2024, it's $107K. All right, $59K in household income up to $107K today to afford the typical U.S. home. Astounding. That is up more than 80% in 4 years. But at the same time, here's how bad it is. Median U.S. household income did not keep pace. You probably figured that much. American incomes are not up 80% in the past 4 years. But in 2020, the household income, the median, was $66K. Today it's $81K. Well, that's up only 23%. So the income needed to comfortably afford a home is up 80%, while the actual median income has risen just 23%. That's per Zillow. Well, who does this hurt the most? Of course, it hurts that prospective first-time homebuyer. Not just because they usually have entry-level incomes as well, but it's because they don't have any equity to roll forward into a purchase. And when first-time homebuyers never get that mortgage loan pre-approval, what happens? They have to rent. So this affordability trend is good for income property owners. And, this is one big reason why, for a while now, I have said that I expect the homeownership rate to fall, and therefore for America to have more renters, more rental demand. Well, that has now begun to fall from 66% in Q3 last year to 65.7% in Q4 of last year, and expect the homeownership rate to keep dropping and that share of renters in the United States to keep rising. Now, let's break down this poor affordability by city. Let's break it down by metro area. I'll start with some select lowest price cities, and then let's work our way up to the highest price cities, and I'll tell you as we ascend when we pass the national mark. And you're going to notice that the lowest price cities, which are the earlier ones that I mentioned here, they tend to be the better areas for real estate cash flow. Here we go. In 2020, the typical Pittsburgh home could be bought with a $35K household income. Wow, that's low. Today, it takes $58K. Memphis, a very popular investor city here at GRE, maybe our top investor city, that has gone from $38K in 2020 to a $70K household income today. And it appears that more people will have to rent in Memphis. Cleveland from $41K up to $71K. Birmingham, $42K up to $74K. Detroit, $45 up to $76. Buffalo, $42 up to $77. St. Louis, $45 up to $77. Kansas City, $52 up to $93. Houston, $56 up to $95. San Antonio, $57 up to $95. Columbus, Ohio, $52 up to $96. Chicago, still pretty affordable for such a world-class city, but the median household income required to afford the average Chicago home in 2020 was $65K, and today it's $105K. And then you've got that aforementioned national average, $59K in income needed 4 years ago, up to $107K today. Philly, $61K up to $109. Jacksonville, $58K up to $109. Minneapolis, $72 up to $114. Baltimore, $70 up to $114. Atlanta, $59 up to $115. Tampa, $57 up to $116. I mean, we're looking at more than a doubling in Tampa. Las Vegas, $65 up to $120. Dallas, $68 up to $121. Phoenix, $66 up to $131. We're looking at about a doubling of the household income that it takes to afford the median home in Phoenix just over the last 4 years. Miami, $76 to $151. That's another, basically a doubler there. Denver, $101 up to $173. Boston, $118 to $205. New York City, $135 to $214. And we just got a few left here as we're getting close to the top. Seattle, $120 to $214. And then the top three, Los Angeles, $158K to $279K. San Francisco, $220 up to $340K today. And number one, San Jose, California, Silicon Valley, $263K up to $454K. That's how much a household needs to earn to afford the typical home in their local market. Not an extravagant home, not a home that's even above average, just the typical home in their local market as calculated by Zillow. That's what's happened to affordability basically since COVID began about 4 years ago. So some other takeaways from what I just told you about there. The correlation here is that lower price metros often have high homeownership rates because they are more affordable. Yet paradoxically, those places, those low-cost places with high ownership rates, are often the best markets for you to own rental property in due to that affordability. And this is not just true in the United States. When you look at Europe, and we shared a map of this on our Get Rich Education Instagram page last week, Europe also has higher home ownership rates in less expensive nations led by Kosovo at an astounding 98% home ownership rate. Can you believe that? 98%. Kosovo, part of the former Yugoslavia, and then Kosovo in the high ownership rate is followed by Albania in second, Romania in third. And again, today's U.S. home ownership rate is nearly 66%. And then conversely, some of Europe's more expensive nations have the lowest home ownership rates. Switzerland is the lowest at just 42%. That's followed by Germany and Austria with the next lowest European home ownership rates. With declining U.S. affordability, sometimes, do you ever think that it just feels like dollars are losing all of their value? Some of these figures just look like funny money anymore. If you visited usdebtclock.org recently, you'll see that our national debt keeps ticking up, nearing $35 trillion now. Now, I recently listened to two guys talking about rising prices back when they were kids, and when they were kids, they thought that meant that the economy is prosperous. Have you ever thought that, even as a kid? I didn't. I never thought that rising prices were some sign of economic prosperity, like when you were a kid, that pack of baseball cards going up from 50 cents to 60 cents symbolized that economic prosperity was taking place somewhere else. I never thought that. I guess as a kid, though, I thought that if a 100K home increased in price to 200K, that it meant that it doubled in value, although it surely did not. I probably thought that as a kid before I understood things like inflation and leverage. But inflation is not some law of nature, not at all. If you want to look at what happens as technology progresses, well, of course, prices should go down. If we are picking apples by hand, and then a machine comes along that picks apples 100 times faster, and you don't need to pay all these human harvesters anymore, well, then the price of apples should plummet. Prices should go way down as we get better at producing things. So just imagine how much higher prices would be today if there weren't these productivity gains that try to hold down the inflated prices just somewhat. My gosh. But instead, governments are incentivized to expand the money supply to pay for programs rather than tax you. What's the easiest way to pay for a $1 trillion federal infrastructure program? Just print $1 trillion out of thin air. That way, they didn't have to send you a tax bill because people don't like seeing tax bills. They didn't have to ask for your vote either. Just quietly print it. And now that they've printed $1 trillion more, every single dollar that you're holding on to just got diluted. That's another reason that inflation is immoral. If you hold dollars in a savings account, Fed inflation diluted it. If you hold dollars in a stock brokerage account, inflation just diluted it. If you hold equity in a property, inflation just diluted it. Well, what hedges you against inflation? Gold and Bitcoin. They both break the government monopoly on money. That's just simply hedging yourself. And then what doesn't just hedge, but help you profit from inflation? As we know, that formula is income property with debt. Now, the United Nations, they recognize 193 sovereign states across the world, many with their own currency. And like I said, governments are incentivized to expand the money supply to pay for programs rather than tax you. It's not just an American thing. Everybody does it. It is just a race to the bottom with every currency, all of which eventually go to zero. Historically, they all have. Well, you and I, we've actually gotten richer from our technology advancements in some ways, and at the same time, we are poorer for our D-based dollars. By almost any standard out there, you and I are both richer than our grandfathers were. The technology is better. The iPhone in your pocket would blow away your grandfather or your great-grandfather. But back in my grandfather's day, see, here's the difference. He could pay for both of his kids to go to college and do it without student loans. Grandpa could easily find a job in a factory, bought a house. His wife didn't have to work. He supported his kids. His wife was home so she could take care of the house and kids. We have lost that. That wave of high inflation in the 70s and 80s made it so that both parents had to soon work, eroding the nuclear family. Inflation destroys families because wages often don't keep up when you have these waves of inflation. Both parents work and the wife cooks less, meaning even more obesity. And now, in this era of inflation, the 2020s, the first-time home buyer has instead become the renter, so that the median age of the first-time home buyer is now 36 per the NAR, which I think I mentioned on a show last year, and that number looks to be going higher. So the American dream, owning your home, it looks like that soon won't even begin until you're near 40. And it's not just a result of government inflation. Government regulation has driven up the cost of doing business, hence why the prices are so high. You're seeing more and more evidence of inflation widening this chasm between the haves and the have-nots. I mean, Macy's, the department store, they recently announced plans to reorganize their stores around this hollowing out of the middle class. Businesses are reacting, and inflation is the problem. In fact, it made a lot of news a few weeks ago. You might have seen the story where, gosh, could you believe that a public figure would say this out loud? Kellogg's CEO Gary Pilnick commented on how Americans are dealing with high grocery prices when he was quoted as saying, "Cereal for dinner is something that is probably more on trend now," and he got blasted for it. From malnutrition to family erosion to unaffordable homes, inflation from the central bank is the culprit, and it's reached levels of immorality. More straight ahead, I'm Keith Weinhold. You're listening to episode 492 of Get Rich Education. You know, I'll just tell you, for the most passive part of my real estate investing, personally, I put my own dollars with Freedom Family Investments because their funds pay me a stream of regular cash flow, and returns are better than a bank savings account, up to 12%. Their minimums are as low as $25K. You don't even need to be accredited for some of them. It's all backed by real estate, and I kind of love how the tax benefit of doing this can offset capital gains and your W-2 job's income. And they've always given me exactly their stated return, paid on time, so it's steady income, no surprises, while I'm sleeping or just doing the things I love. For a little insider tip, I've invested in their Power Fund. To get going on that, text FAMILY to 66866. Oh, and this isn't a solicitation. If you want to invest where I do, just go ahead and text FAMILY to 66866. For a lender that's a specific expert with income property, you need Ridge Lending Group and MLS 42056. In GRE history, from beginners to veterans, they provided our listeners with more mortgages than anyone. It's where I get my own loans for single-family rentals up to fourplexes. Start your pre-qualification and chat with President Chaley Ridge personally. They'll even customize a plan tailored to you for growing your portfolio. Start at ridgelendinggroup.com, ridgelendinggroup.com.
Hi, this is Russell Gray, co-host of the Real Estate Guys radio show, and you're listening to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold. Don't quit your daydream.
Welcome back to Get Rich Education, where we aren't day trading, we are decade trading. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold, As we approach springtime, before your tenant considers moving out, this is the time to remind them of the cost of moving. I've seen landlords effectively do this with a well-worded letter. If you're raising the rent, this could accompany that notice. Tell them how costly moving is, because tenants often don't realize that until it's too late. And moving is also one of the most stressful things that a human can do. Vacancy and turnover are your biggest expense, so you should consider doing this before your tenant makes moving plans, because by then it's too late. Andrew Carnegie said that 90% of all millionaires become so through owning real estate. I could still believe the 90% figure today, but sadly, Carnegie's quote wasn't quite inflation-proofed, and I'm sure he would admit that if he were alive today. A net worth of $1 million today does not make you rich. Millionaire? Not a wealth marker, but it probably means that you aren't poor. But yeah, a millionaire is no longer that aspirational. Multi-millionaire might not be. A net worth of $2 million or more. If you're under, say, 60, a $2 million net worth, that probably means that you better keep doing something to generate income. Here at GRE, we probably spend less than 5% of our content, or even less than 2% of our content here, describing what most people think of conventional investment vehicles, like, say, a 401k or a Roth IRA. Instead, we follow something more like what Andrew Carnegie said. Because being conventional, it just doesn't get you anywhere. And trimming your expenses, that really doesn't move the meter much in your life unless you do enough of it to make you miserable. Saving money by getting your hair cut at home is not going to build financial freedom. How many at-home haircuts would you need in order for that to happen? There's no number. Neither will finding a way to get a free Thanksgiving turkey or saving $90 on a flight itinerary by adding a layover and losing 3 hours of your time. That's not respecting your own time. So this is why we don't talk about conventional stuff here. Savers lose wealth, stock investors maintain wealth, and real estate investors build wealth. But now really, why else don't we discuss something like the benefits of a Roth IRA or comparing them to a traditional IRA? The main difference there being with a Roth, you fund with post-tax dollars, meaning that you pay the tax today, versus a traditional IRA where you pay the tax later rather than now. Well, you can't draw the funds penalty-free until you're older, for one thing. And also, if you're under age 50, you can only contribute $7,000 a year to an IRA, and it's $8,000 a year if you're over 50. It doesn't move the meter in your life. And also, since we're a show about increasing your income, not cutting your expenses, in a don't live below your means, grow your means vein, well, this year's Roth IRA income limits are $161,000 for single tax filers and $240,000 for those married filing jointly. All right, well, if you are not there at that income level yet, you are targeting exceeding those limits, so you won't be qualifying to participate anyway, even if you had wanted to. 401ks and IRAs, they take money out of your pocket every month and every year. And instead, with income property, you've made a plan to put more money, tax advantage money, in your pocket every month and year. And this is all why I frown on budgeting too. Now, one classic investor axiom that makes a little more sense to me is that you can't time the market. This is precisely why time in the market beats timing the market. Another phrase you've surely heard. I think that another way to say this is take what you've been given. Yeah, in general, once you've got a sound strategy, take what you've been given. The epiphany of Real Estate Pays 5 Ways is a motivator to adding more property. For example, when I bought my first property, yes, that modest and seminal blue fourplex in 2002, there were pros and cons to buying 22 years ago, just like there always are. Well, what I did is I took what I was given because I began to understand how real estate could benefit me. And do you want to know what the market conditions were like back then? Let's look at this and compare this to today's income property market. This will be really interesting. What are the big factors that have changed in 22 years? Well, back in 2002, there were pros, neutrals, and cons to buying then. Back then, the pros were a good rent-to-price ratio, and I got a historically low 6 3/8 mortgage rate. Yes, I still remember that. The neutral back then was an average vacancy rate, and the cons back in 2002 were low inflation, a high housing supply, the fact that I had made a $295,000 full price offer for that fourplex, which felt high at the time. I asked the owner if he'd come down, and he said no. And another con is that I own in a small metro area anchorage, which was more vulnerable to economic change. That's something that I didn't even realize at the time. And another con to me buying back then, as successfully as that turned out, was weak future demographics. Tenants quickly vacated because it was so easy for them to get first-time homebuyer loans, liar loans, amidst that loose lending environment. So right there were the pros, neutrals, and cons in the marketplace when I first started out, taking what I was given. I took what the market gave me and became a profiteer once I had a strategy. Now, this current environment, let's look at it. It could very well be better than when I started out. Here's what the market is giving investors here in the middle of the 2020s decade. The pros are low vacancy, higher inflation, though I would not call it high any longer. Another pro, low housing supply, the polar opposite of when I began. There's strong future demographic demand. And another pro is, like I've been touching on earlier here in that first part of the show, this dreadful first-time home buyer affordability. And what that does is that increases tenancy duration. Those are the pros today. The neutrals are strict loan underwriting and historically average interest rates. Okay, so those are both neutral conditions. And then the cons today are lower rent-to-price ratios and higher insurance premiums. So there they are. They're the progression of pros, neutrals, and cons in the real estate market since I bought my first property in 2002. One has got to own assets when the middle class is hollowing out. It's caving in. No one wants to end up as desperate as Google's AI struggling to catch up with Microsoft and OpenAI. We don't want that to happen. And uncertainty, as you think about the future and growing your portfolio, uncertainty, that is an ever-present condition with zero antidote. Uncertainty will only disappear when the world ends. These factors of pros, neutrals, and cons, they constantly shift. And in fact, life is about not knowing. The only safe years of your life are past years. Live in the question. Take what you've been given. That's the message here. Like I discussed last week, investor purchases are breaking records in today's environment. And speaking of today's market conditions, let me give you something tangible that you can really sink your teeth into with some real property addresses. These are ones that you find at GRE Marketplace. Let me start with the most expensive one first. In San Antonio, Texas, it is a 2024 new build fourplex for a price of $1,100,000. Yeah, hey, big spender, $1.1 million. The rent is $7,580, Class A neighborhood, 5,000 square feet, 3-bed, 2 baths per unit. Gosh, I wish this would have been my first ever fourplex. Mine was 2 beds, 1 bath, and when I bought it, it was about 20 years old. Well, the interest rate on this new build San Antonio fourplex is 4.25%. You need to use the seller preferred lender for that. Your down payment will be $275,000. Projected monthly cash flow is $1,413. The second property is at 1610 27th Street Northeast in Canton, Ohio. Yes, Canton, Ohio, the home of the Pro Football Hall of Fame, which I visited about 5 years ago. This is a single-family rental in Canton. The price is $130K. The rent is $1125, B-class neighborhood, 1,104 square feet. It was built in 1952. It has 3 beds and 1 bath. $33K is the down payment, $279 of projected monthly cash flow. And then the last one that I'll detail here is 8700 East 79th Terrace in Kansas City, Missouri. It's also a single-family rental, $213K purchase price. The rent on it is $1875. And gosh, that is a really good rent-to-price ratio there, almost 0.9% here in Kansas City. B is the neighborhood class. It's 1,188 square feet. Built in 1967, 4 beds, 2 baths, and it is a down payment of $53K down with a projected monthly cash flow of $449 there in this Kansas City single-family rental. Now, you don't want to count on rent increases, but rents in the Midwest are now rising faster than any other region in the whole nation. And that's not hard to do, by the way, because in most U.S. regions, rents are hardly rising at all today. Now, as far as homes built in the 50s and 60s, although it's still good for you to mark more for maintenance expenses on properties of that age, you recall that I said earlier that you're likely doing more decade trading than day trading with these rehabbed or new build investor homes. In 7 to 10 years, that's typically how long you want to plan on holding for, because by that time, or even earlier, it might have been as little as 3 years here recently, but by that time, sufficient equity has built up so that you want to sell in order to keep your return high and trade up tax-free. Well, you only need new or rehabbed systems or components, therefore, to last 7 to 10 years, and you're typically selling the property before you need anything like a new roof or new HVAC. I personally don't believe I've ever held any rental property for more than 10 years. Now, as I gave details of those 3 available properties there, this really is a time in the market cycle for you to consider new build properties. If you can swing the higher price, and that's for a lot of reasons. You probably realize the first one is that because builders are still buying your rate down for you to under 6%. You saw there with that San Antonio new construction fourplex how a builder is buying down your rate to 4.25. Gosh. Another trend that's been developing is the new home price premium over resale property seems to have declined substantially in the U.S., but builders just cannot keep doing these rate buy downs forever. Once rates go down, they're going to have less incentive to do them, for one thing. There won't be a need there. And also, see, it depends on the builder, but a lot of builders, they bought land back in 2021 that they're only building on today. And those builders got to pay lower 2021 prices for that land that they're now building on. Well, in a year or two, when builders are selling property where they had to buy the land in 2023, that is going to be reflected in higher prices in a year or two. So go new build if you can swing it. If not, you've got your 7 to 10 year hold strategy for resale properties. And that 7 to 10 year hold strategy also applies to new builds. Own a scarce asset that everyone is going to need, all 340 million Americans. And if any of these income properties or ones like those seem interesting to you, go ahead and contact your GRE investment coach. If you don't have one, they'll help you for free. And our coaches really just make it easy for you. You can book a time right on their calendar, set up a friendly Zoom or phone call, and strategize at gremarketplace.com. Until next week, I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Don't quit your daydream.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education LLC exclusively.
The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.